Right. Today's video is basically going to be about the Maria's character from Maria, Full of Grace. We're going to look today at the final scenes, or the American stage of the film. The last video I did basically ended after the interrogation scene. That's where I was looking up to. So this, I'm going to be talking about trying to analyse Maria's character and say again why these characteristics are important towards the message of the film, what the director's trying to achieve. Again, which I think is always important. It's not just saying this is what Maria's like, but you've got to say why she's like that, why it's important. The first kind of general point I'm going to make about Maria's character in the American scenes when she's in Jackson Heights in New York, or in Queens, is basically that her character traits, both her attributes and defects, are kind of magnified intensely by the stresses and strains of the pressures that she's under in the USA. In this part of the film, she's under a huge amount of stress. There is physical danger, mental issues, huge worries about what she's going to do, and therefore what we see and her reactions to these situations that expose her character, tell us a lot more clearly. So let's just kind of have a think about what those pressures are. The first thing, obviously, there's a kind of risk to her life. She sees Lucy die in the hotel. She has no idea exactly what happened. It could well be that the two thugs, who I think are called Wilson and Carlos in the credits, they might have finally killed her. So she is very afraid that they will do the same to her and Blanca, particularly after they take the drugs. So there's fear of that. She has fears for her family. She is worried that because of what Don Javier said, if anything happens to Pepas, then Don Javier said we'll pay a little visit to your mother, your little Pacho, your abuelita. So she's very worried about that. We see that obviously in the phone call she makes. She becomes more worried about the baby, particularly after the argument with Blanca, so that becomes another issue. There is a huge amount, I think, of guilt and worry, both in terms of what she's doing. I think there is a bit of guilt in terms of the way that the action she's taking, the kind of, the lies she's telling, possibly the way she's exposed other people to danger. I think that starts to tell on her as well. Obviously, worries would include if she's going to stay in America, which isn't particularly one of her main concerns, really, to start with. But when that does become an issue, she's got to think about where's she going to live. Is she going to have a job? Can she get money? Who is going to be her support network? It's not just go to America and everything is sorted, although Don Fernando clearly is someone that can help her out a bit. But she is very on her own. And again, I think that this is another thing, is that she's very much a fish out of water. She's only 17, she's not got a huge amount of experience, she doesn't speak the language in the USA, she's an unknown city, she's out of her depth in terms of her life experiences so far. So they're all things that will magnify her response to adversity, I think. And again, I think that a lot of the characteristics she displays, you could look at through the prism of how she responds to adversity. I think that's a very good way of looking at Maria's character. Again, there are various things that I think kind of play out. There are kind of like competing character aspects. The positive side, the negative side that we see. Again, I talked a little bit about this in the last video about the kind of scene to the second third of the film. But again, we have a kind of a response between her instinctive, impulsive, kind of very resourceful, acting on the spur of the moment, kind of headstrong, deciding what to do, as soon as things come up, versus a very kind of thoughtful, reflective, Maria that starts really evaluating her paths and decisions. And I think there's an interesting contrast between those. One of the things I think that made that actually gave that earned Catalina Sandino Moreno the nomination of best female actress in a film was the fact of how she react. There are lots of scenes where she's very quiet, she's thinking, she's pondering what to do. One of the main scenes where we really see this, for example, is when she's at the bottom of the stairs in Carla's building. She hasn't met Carla yet, and this is a real low. She's kind of crying, she's struggling, she's thinking about all the things that are going wrong and what have happened, and again, this really shows us the pressure she's under. Just as another point on that, interesting, that's very much at her bottom ebb. For example, there is just stairs next to her, which is kind of maybe symbolic of the only way is up is from here. You could argue, though, that another real bad ebb for her is after Carla discovers that Maria's been lying to her. That's a terrible moment as well. But there are lots of moments where Maria's thinking, she thinks after the argument with Blanca, where Blanca tells her she's a terrible mother for kind of swallowing drugs with a baby when she's pregnant. Again, where she goes for a walk, things are obviously going through her mind. She looks at the flowers in the shop, which remind her of Colombia. She sees the icons of Jesus Christ, which again give her reason to think. So again, that's another moment where she's clearly weighing up all the things that she has to do and bearing in mind what the right thing to do is, what's best for her, what's best for her family, what's best for the baby, and so on. Again, there's another moment where she's lying in bed with Blanca. Blanca asks her what she's going to do. It happens again in the coffee shop towards the end of the film. So again, you can see someone that is starting to think well and think maturely about the actions that she's taking. You know, and again, contrast this with a lot of impulsive decisions that she makes. For example, the instinct to leave the hotel, very much a spur of the moment decision. Again, there's potential of them being killed. She's very quick to lie. There's a lot of moments where she argues straight away with Blanca without really, where her kind of feelings get the better of her. She doesn't really think things through in a reasoned way. And again, that's the kind of ability to reflect and make decisions, I think, is very important towards her kind of achieving grace at the end of the film. Again, another kind of part of her character is this kind of, you could talk about her resourcefulness and kind of toughness and her kind of front, faced with a kind of a vulnerability that is there. Again, we've talked a lot about the vulnerability in the previous third of the film, both in the airport scene, in the interrogation, in the plane, with Don Javier. Again, we see this here a lot as well, particularly when she is at the bottom of the stairs. She's really not sure what to do. She seems to be making decisions on the hoof without really having a plan. Again, but we do see this kind of braveness and this toughness on many occasions. For example, standing up to the two kind of the drug thugs at the end of the film, where she demands their money and the money for Lucy as well. Again, it's a very principled, strong stance to take. And I think that this kind of battle of a kind of toughness and the vulnerability is indicative of, or symbolic of, the characteristics that, you know, a lot of immigrants may have. It really is showing the pressures that these immigrants may go under, have to withstand to get anywhere. It's a very tough, difficult journey. It's not like they just pop over the border and everything's sorted out for them. So again, it's an attempt to try and personalise that kind of illegal immigrant, that kind of faceless threat that many Americans perceive as being, you know, a problem in their society, and try and show what their situation is like as well through Maria's experiences. Again, we've talked a little bit about it, her immorality and her morality. We've mentioned this problem before that she has. Again, if we're talking about her more immoral, her bad side, again, we've got the dishonesty. Again, the worst thing she does throughout the film probably is the constant lying to Carla about what happened to Lucy. Again, the lies just add up, and she doesn't have the strength to say what really happens because she's really afraid of what would happen to herself. It's a moment where her own selfishness and worries about needing somewhere to stay and needing some help override the moral thing to do, which is to tell a sister that her sister's died. And again, this selfishness in terms of how she thinks about her baby that Blanca exposes in the argument. I personally think that Maria has moments where she considers the baby as being important. For example, the argument with Juan in the first third of the film. Then again, as well, with the interrogation scene in the airport where the baby becomes important. But it's not a primary concern for her until Blanca really says it to her face and tells her just how irresponsible she's being. And from then on, the joy she sees when she sees the baby in the ultrasound, the fact that she's looking at the appointment card when she's going to the airport with Blanca, and that probably is the thing that makes her decide to stay. Obviously, having heard what Carla has said to her about, the chance to bring up her child in a much safer place than Colombia would be, to give the chances to a child that they might not have had. So that selfishness turns into more of a sense of responsibility. Similarly, again, that sense of honesty, at the end, I think means that she feels she has to confront the mistakes she's made. And again, we have a sense of repentance and confession and penitence from the moment when Don Fernando has called Carla, and Carla obviously accuses Maria of doing all these things. Maria then confesses. She then carries out acts of penance by giving money to Carla, not Carla directly, to Don Fernando to sort out returning Lucy's body to Colombia. Retrieving the money, obviously, again, is the same act of that, and obviously asking for forgiveness from Carla as well. So I think this is another moment where grace, to some extent, or maturity is achieved. She realises the mistake she's made. She gets back off the path of sinfulness that she's gone down since being tempted by Don Javier and more by Franklin to be involved in the drug trade, and it's where she tries to get back onto the right path. So there is a conflict between dishonesty and honesty, morality, immorality, particularly throughout this last part of the film until she does the right thing. So again, I think they're the most important aspects of her character that we need to talk about. And again, I think that the best way of looking at these is through the fact that they're kind of amplified by the adversity that she faces throughout the film. But again, all the characteristics that she has that will allow her to make her decisions to stay in America, to do the right thing, are ones that have been there before. We've seen her strength of character by standing up to people, for example, to the foreman in the plantation, standing up to Juan for wanting something more than an alcoholic guy who doesn't really love her or take the responsibility of being a parent necessarily. We see her ability to make decisions. We see her kind of the importance of her faith and being able to do the right thing by her visit to the church. So these aren't things that aren't suddenly sprung upon us. These are things that have always been there and part of her, and enable her to survive the perils of the journey and, eventually take decisions which are very difficult, but are based more on thinking about the benefits for others rather than what is most important for herself. Okay, hope that's been useful.